Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished guests, let me start by thanking the organizers of this meeting for the honor and privilege to be part of this incredibly inspiring past 3 days almost, and to have this opportunity to share some thoughts on science policy perspectives on behalf of the World Academy of Sciences. I have to start by saying that the science that I've heard has been absolutely breathtaking. And it was a powerful reminder of the transformative role of science in shaping a more inclusive and just world. In this tumultuous time that we're living in, the ubiquity of science gives us hope in transcending political and cultural barriers as a universal language to build bridges between the peoples of this world. And I think in the opening session, His Eminence Cardinal Turkin reminded us that we live in a world where we are interconnected and have a shared vulnerability. But I think throughout the discussions, there was this optimism almost of us living in a world that's equal. But the reality is that we do live in worlds where there are very sharp disparities and asymmetries in knowledge generation. And I think if we're truly going to realize this optimism and hope for science, we really need to be bridging that gap between where knowledge is generated, how it is generated, and who benefits from that knowledge that is being generated. If we're really going to realize that hope of benefiting all of society, ensuring security for everyone, including the biodiversity and planetary health. And I wanted to go back to the World Academy of Sciences. It was set up with the vision of Nobel laureate Abdul 40 years ago, and with the dream and vision that science, technology, and innovation can achieve sustainable development, particularly for low middle income countries. In the 40 years, we have gathered the best of the best minds in over 1,400 scientists, mostly from low middle income countries. And I think when we first started off, we were talking about third world countries, that was, but now we talk about science, technology lagging countries, low middle income countries. And we have focused in training and capacity building at many levels, and also building research infrastructure, catalyzing critical mass of scientists. And we can see how countries have been transformed through those investments. But what has become an increasing challenge, including the work that we've done on science diplomacy, I wanted to add, in partnership with the American Academy for the Advancement of Sciences, where many low middle income countries do not have chief science advisors. And so the science academies and building science academies at a national level, at a regional level, have been important neutral platforms to take the knowledge that is being generated and translate that to policy and practice. But what we have to appreciate is that when we look at disparities and inequalities, the disproportionate burden is held in low middle income countries. And most of those are in certain instances, the ones at the lowest socioeconomic ladder. So it's the socioeconomic challenges that make those more vulnerable, those communities, those people more vulnerable. And then when we look at, as we've been building this capacity, one of the biggest threats and things that has been undermining it is the wars and conflicts and natural disasters that again disproportionately impact low middle income countries. And these displacements of individuals, estimated, and I think it's a very conservative estimate, of about 134 million people, is actually disproportionately affecting low middle income countries. And there's three impacts that I want to talk about and influences that undermine our ability towards equity. The first is that There's an intergenerational impact from the disruptions in education that we see. Two is that it includes scientists, and some scientists leave the country, so there's a brain drain there, or there's an internal displacement of individuals. And importantly, in the more recent wars and conflicts that we've been seeing, we've seen the destruction of infrastructure, and that's primary schools, that's hospitals, that's high schools, and these tertiary institutions. So what we've been building has been undermined. And in the words of Pope Francis, where he talks about peace as a prerequisite for sustainable development, I cannot underscore that anymore in terms of our ability to really build a society, a world that everyone benefits and where some lives are not valued more than other lives. Now, turning to the science policy place and how this Anthropocene era and also how AI could be playing a role, we can see that it could be a challenge or it could be an opportunity. And I think it could be a challenge in terms of widening these inequalities that we see, or it could be an opportunity to bridge and close those. And what we can learn from these opportunities that we have is that because of the complexity of what we're dealing with and the regional and national challenges, it requires multidisciplinary approaches. It requires partnerships and collaborations. And we've heard during this meeting that there's a certain lack of trust. And we've spoken about trust between scientists, and we've also spoken about the lack of trust in the public. And so I want to talk a little bit about the international collaborations and partnerships in relation to scientists. And those have to be built on mutual trust and respect. Partnerships work when they're synergistic, where each partner brings something to the table. And importantly, when we come together, can we achieve the the science that transcends our ability and our views, as we've currently been looking at it in a very, very siloed approach. And I think those would be fundamental and essential. I think as we move towards science and policy and that interface, we typically think about working with governments. But I think in COVID, we've been reminded that the science is the first step, and that evidence is the first step. But it's how do we translate that, not just into policy, but into interventions and products that everyone can benefit from. And in COVID, what we saw was we could contribute to knowledge, variants of concern, and contribute to developing vaccines and therapeutics. But when it came to access, there was inequitable access. But also, it's how we communicate science. And if we simply stay with the peer-reviewed literature and we leave the public behind, and if science is going to be the centerpiece and our hope for the future, then I think we have a lot more work to do in terms of how we communicate with the public. And I wanted to pick up on first, starting with the understanding of the scientific method and the importance of that scientific method. And we understand it in this room when we debate and discuss how we're able to elevate the science. But when we go to the public whose mind has not been trained on all these differences of opinion and how we can argue in safe spaces, it devalues the science, and they look at it as, oh, we can't agree. And the public is used to either a yes-no answer, or they want to have a space where they want to blame somebody. And I think the social media platforms and digital platforms have worked negatively in this instance, and in terms of actually being there more easily available and accessible. And I think that I'm going to leave the rest for the discussion that we have, but just to say that we do have a lot what we do at this point in time and how we do it to address these asymmetries that we have is going to be critical in terms of how we realize the potential of what we have both with AI and this particular epoch or aeon that we are in. Thank you very much.